name is Jan, and I will be talking to you today about computer system security. This course will cover a wide range of concepts within computer system security from a couple of different vantage points. But first, I wanted to have this sort of introductory video to get at the meaning of the term and the conceptual, philosophical meaning in which we'll be operating, right? So what is computer system security? Let's deconstruct this into its constituent parts and then talk about it as a whole later in sort of interesting example that we'll look at. Let's start with the term security, right? Security is a term with many meanings. It can mean different things to different people: emotional security, financial security, physical security, etc. Right? To us, we're talking about it from the perspective of systems security. And what does system security mean? System security means the security of a system with respect to a specified property, right? So let's take an example. Let's say we have a system that is a vending machine. This isn't necessarily a computer system. We'll get to that later. This is a system, a complex system that has a certain goals, certain properties that should be maintained. One of these is that you should not be able to receive snacks or drinks or whatnot without putting in some money into the machine, without payment, right? So let's look at examples of how the security of such machines, of such systems, can be compromised. Usually when I teach this course in person, this is a discussion, a back and forth Q&A where we kind of come up with attacks, come up with defenses. Unfortunately, right now there's a one-way transmission, so we'll have to adapt, and I'll just blabber at you about potential compromises and so forth of a vending machine. So let's start with the very simple one that maybe some of us have pulled as kids when we had smaller arms. You can take your hand, put it through the kind of place where you retrieve your drink or whatever, and then reach way up there and try to grab snacks on the bottom row, right? This is one attack that, if the vending machine is designed in a naive way, can succeed, right? And using this attack, you violate the security specification of a vending machine, in that you receive a snack without paying. So how would you fix that, right? Well, of course, modern machines take several different approaches. You could just have some sort of a barrier, so you couldn't reach your hand up, and the barrier might flip to let or open to let the merchandise through when you actually pay. Some machines have like just a little capsule container thing that grabs whatever you just bought and actually releases it into wherever it needs to release so that you can grab it, and so forth. There are different ways to close this gap, right? So then we came up with an attack against this computer system, and the designers, developers, whatnot of the computer system came up with a fix, a patch, let's say, right, to restore the security of it. Well, are we done? No, because that system is still not perfectly secure. You can imagine someone coming in with a hammer, breaking the glass at the front of the machine, and walking away with the snacks or the drinks or whatnot. Again, the security of the system has been compromised. Someone was able to retrieve merchandise without paying for it. So then, of course, we can fix that as well. We can put a steel mesh behind the glass so that even with a hammer you couldn't get through. We can make the glass hammer proof or something along these lines, right? So again, here's another attack that bypasses our first defense, but for which we now have a second defense. Now, is that the end of the story? Obviously, no. You can start coming up with increasingly novel attacks, like bringing in counterfeit currency. And now, this machine has to have a way to detect counterfeit currency. Trying to pay with something that is the shape of a quarter and the weight of a quarter, or tying a string to your quarter and pulling it back. These are all attacks that have been performed on real vending machines that real vending machines now have to defend against in order to be secure, right? And vending machines nowadays, of course, are more and more complex systems. There are vending machines that take credit cards. This opens them up to a whole other range of attacks. There are vending machines with which you can talk with your phone and so forth, right? So the complexity of these systems is rising, and the security of these systems is more and more complicated, right? And this discussion is really meant to highlight one thing, and that is that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? The story of the vending machine compromise has repeatedly been, here's a big complex system, let's try to find one clever thing we can do, whether it's putting our arms up through the outlet of the merchandise, or figuring out that we can break it with a hammer, or tying a string to a quarter and so forth. One little thing we can do that takes advantage of one part of the system, one small weakness, to fully break the security, to get snacks or drinks or whatnot when we haven't paid, right? So with that in mind, let's move on and talk about computer systems, right? Computer systems are, as we know, not secure. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing the huge amount of data breaches and chaos that we see in the context of computer system security, and they're very complicated and not super approachable. They're also growing rapidly in complexity. So this graph here is a graph of the amount of code, just amount of code in the Linux kernel over the years. And we see over the years just this monotonic almost growth continuously. And an interesting thing that we see is every year a bunch of code is added, and then that code is rewritten, refactored, removed over time, but a lot of it stays around. So in the Linux kernel, even today, there's a ton of code that was added in 2006. It looks, just based on a rough look, maybe a tenth of the code in the Linux kernel is 14 years old. 14 years ago, cybersecurity was a completely different world. And cybersecurity practices, safe programming practices were very different. So this is a interesting influence on the security of these code bases, and that there's a lot of old code, there's a lot of code that people might not understand, and vulnerabilities get introduced. So let's look, once we get through these takeaways, that computer systems are complex, and with these complexities you can get vulnerabilities. And as we saw from the vending machine example, a single vulnerability can break the security of the whole system. The chain, again, is only as weak as strong as its weakest link, and if you figure out one place to jam your violation of security, you can leverage open the whole system very frequently. So let's look at this as a whole. What is computer system security? From the view of an example. And the example focuses on this character. This is not a Muppet. I mean, the picture is technically of a Muppet. But the character behind the Muppet, the individual behind the Muppet, is responsible for a very high profile hack that is really a perfect example of a single flaw or a small collection of flaws leveraging open the security of an entire company and leading to extreme real world effects. A lot of this is gleaned from an interview that this individual gave to a reporter for a famous online magazine. I always slips my mind exactly which one. I think it might have been Wired. And for real, there was, you can find this online, this interview of an actual human reporter right there, talking to right there a puppet, and the human reporter is asking questions and the puppet is responding using voice anonymization and so forth. It's super interesting to watch. Along with this hacker also wrote a write-up. There'll be links to it in my slides, and I highly recommend you read this for a example of real world, actual systems compromise that is kind of not sanitized, it's just raw and described as is, which is super interesting to read. So this hack was pulled off. The individual's handle is Phineas Fisher. It's unclear who exactly they are. They might be multiple people. They might be an entire group. They might be one person. But sometime in 2016, Phineas Fisher took issue with the actions of a company called Hacking Team. Hacking Team was an Italian company that created a number of hacking tools, and Phineas Fisher was unhappy about the clientele of Hacking Team, which initially allegedly, and then eventually, after this hack took place, very publicly included oppressive regimes and so on. So in 2016, on one sunny day in July, 2015 now I see from the tweet, I always mix up these dates. July 6th, 2015, Hacking Team changed their Twitter handle to Hacked Team and tweeted, since we have nothing to hide, we're publishing all of our emails, files, and source code. And these files included audio recordings of phone calls, just an enormous amount of information. It was a brutal disclosure. And of course, they didn't do this willingly. Phineas Fisher compromised Hacking Team's entire cyber infrastructure and disclosed all of this on the internet. So how did this happen? How was the security of this computer system so thoroughly violated as to essentially destroy this company? Hacking Team can cease to exist in any large high-profile capacity as a result of this. They were hit with a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism, controversy, and so forth because of the disclosed information, and their business suffered very heavily. So let's walk through the steps that Phineas Fisher took to Hacking Team. I mentioned there'll be a link to a write-up. That's the link down at the bottom of the slides. These write-ups keep getting taken down for whatever reason, so that's just kind of the latest version that exists out there. The write-up is interesting in that Phineas Fisher lays out exactly the steps that they took to carry out this attack. It's super interesting, and we'll follow it step by step. Step one of this compromise was reconnaissance, right? So Phineas Fisher decided to attack Hacking Team, and they looked into what attack vectors are possible. In the write-up, they talk about the different ways that you can get information on a company by looking through press releases, by downloading PDFs released by that company and looking at metadata embedded in the PDFs, by looking on LinkedIn, and all sorts of other routes, right? But in the end, using mostly kind of internet reconnaissance, Phineas Fisher concluded that Hacking Team was actually pretty good in terms of their external internet-facing security. They had very little network-facing infrastructure, mostly a web server, a mail server, a VPN endpoint, and some routers, right? That's a very small digital presence. They had a pretty low public profile and professional external security practices. I mean, these were professional security engineers, right? It's a daunting target. So with this information in mind, Phineas Fisher proceeded to gain a foothold in their network. That was the next step, right? So how did they do it? They looked in one of the embedded devices, routers or appliances or something. Phineas Fisher doesn't specify in their write-up which exactly device, but they took this device, metaphorically speaking, downloaded the software that runs on this device, and you can do this in a number of ways. From, let's say if you have a Linksys router, you can go to Linksys' website and download a firmware update, unpack it, and there's the software. So Phineas Fisher downloaded the software, spent a couple of weeks analyzing that software, and found a 0-day vulnerability previously unknown to anyone, and now unknown to anyone but Phineas Fisher. So Phineas Fisher had a get into the system free card, so to say, and they used it to gain a foothold in Hacking Team's network. After that, having gotten on the network, they performed internal reconnaissance, right? And they had the luxury of taking it slow and steady because, again, the vulnerability that Phineas Fisher used to get into the network was unknown to anyone but them. It is as if you wanted some snacks and you figured out a new way to contort your arm so that you could get past the vending machine's output blocker and get some snacks, right? So until other people catch on, if no one sees you use this trick to steal snacks, you're kind of sitting pretty on quite a lot of stolen food for whatever reason. But anyways, maybe a bad analogy, but that was the situation with Phineas Fisher sitting on Hacking Team's network. So they had the luxury of taking it slow and steady. They did initially passive network listening and then careful, slow, active network scanning to identify several other pieces of infrastructure on Hacking Team's network internally that were now fairly accessible, right, and that weren't properly secured. So again, this is where things start getting really bad, but keep in mind that this is inside their network, right? Inside their network, things weren't secured from people that were already inside their network, but that's, from my experience, not a very uncommon thing. So anyways, they found an unsecured server that had audio recordings of the physical security system. So that's already pretty bad, right? That was a lot of audio that ended up in that final disclosure, and that's not something that you want around. Aside from a lot of confidential information getting set over the phone or whatever within earshot of your cameras, there's a lot of interesting techniques where by using the sound of your keyboard typing, you can recreate, the keys that you press. For example, recent research has indicated that you can use the sound of your key going to a lock to actually synthesize a copy of the key itself, right? So this is maybe theoretical sci-fi-ish attack still, but leaking all of your audio recordings is already bad, but it gets worse, right? Phineas Fisher kept looking, and one thing that they found was a badly secured backup server, which is very bad because on this backup server was a backup of the mail server. And by analyzing the backup of the mail server, they were able to extract the credentials of the administrator of the mail server. And these credentials were still valid on the running mail server. So this is kind of flaw 2 and 3 here, where there was an unsecured backup server. And on that unsecured backup server was a backup that had a password in it that was still active, right? But when you take backups, do you remember to change all your passwords after every backup? I mean, I've never heard a policy like that, but from this perspective, that would have been a good policy. So it turns out that having full control of the mail server, it'll come in useful later for Phineas Fisher, but it also helped them spread out over the network, because they were able to use that mail server to gain administrative privileges over the entire Windows domain that Hacking Team had. Using that, they installed a key sniffer in the on the, sorry, I'm drawing a blank, on the machine of one of the engineers, one of the administrators, and was able to catch a password being entered by that administrator to unlock an encrypted volume containing even more passwords. And then they had basically free reign inside the Hacking Team administrative network, right? Or the production network. The problem is that Phineas needed access to the development network as well. Hacking Team carefully segregated their networks to maintain some best practice separation between the network that they did their development of their hacking tools with, that had the source code of their hacking tools, etc., and the network that they did for everyday business. Oops. And using the passwords that they recovered from the encrypted volume, they were able to log into a monitoring server that had access to both networks. And using an end-day, previously known but unpatched vulnerability in that monitoring server, they were able to gain complete access to the development network, because there were reused passwords between the development and the production network, right? This is more minor things that Hacking Team did wrong from a security perspective, password reuse, and allowing an unpatched vulnerability to be present on their network. But again, this was inside their network, right? And many companies often ignore or deprioritize the security posture inside the network. All right, step 6, of course, having compromised the development environment and gotten all the source code and so forth and so on, Phineas bundled it all up, uploaded it to the cloud, and used their mail server, their control over the Hacking Team mail server, to request a password reset from Twitter. Of course, they emailed that to Hacking Team, to that mail server. Phineas grabbed the link, changed the Twitter details, tweeted out this gloating blurb, and released this data to the world, right? And again, the security of Hacking Team from the outside, before Phineas Fisher started, looked pretty good, right? This was a careful company of cybersecurity professionals. And this whole security chain unraveled when Phineas Fisher found a 0-day vulnerability in a device that Hacking Team were using. In some sense, that's not even Hacking Team's fault from a security perspective, right? That is kind of the takeaway of this story, that computer system security is so difficult to get right that, you know, as we can see through this and tons of other disclosures, even professionals get it wrong all the time. So what went wrong as a summary? There's a bunch of things, a couple of different weak links, but for the most part, they were all minor, right? The lack of two-factor authentication for their internal accounts. But let me ask you, do you use two-factor authentication to log into your laptop? Password reuse. Everyone I know reuses passwords to some extent. Even if not on the internet, then oftentimes on their local computer accounts. I'm going from the bottom up here, but it's a bunch of different stuff, right? They didn't isolate their backup system because possibly because they didn't expect passwords to get backed up, but the passwords did get backed up. And it goes all the way up to this 0-day in the physical infrastructure, or in the public-facing network infrastructure that we discussed. That's a very, very hard thing to avoid. I can guarantee you that most likely whatever public-facing network infrastructure you're running has 0 days that you're not aware of in it, just because this stuff on average is very, very insecure, right? In some sense, all of this security infrastructure that we have built up is just waiting for one vulnerability to crack it all open. So the takeaway that I'm trying to convey is that it's easy to think, oh, okay, well, hacking team screwed up and they got hacked. But the story of computer system security is really that the likely scenario, if that had been your company, things would not have gone very differently. All right, now we're gonna dive into a discussion of ethics in computer hacking, because this is a course that's going to approach this problem of computer system security from an offensive perspective. I want you to understand the types, at least on several very concrete approaches to the problem, the types of vulnerabilities that arise that compromise these entire systems, right? For that, you need to be very careful about ethics. We need to make sure that the knowledge we learn in this course and our general interaction with cybersecurity is ethical and correct, right? So what are the ethics of the hacking team hack, right? Obviously, Phineas Fisher broke into a system that they were not authorized to access. That is essentially the digital equivalent, of course, of breaking into someone's home or business. Phineas Fisher, in their write-up, discussed that they are doing this, that they pulled off that hack because hacking team was unethically selling software to oppressive regimes, and that complicates this discussion in an interesting way. But in general, as ethical computer hackers, I have to stress very thoroughly that you should not practice cybersecurity against any targets that you are not authorized to practice cybersecurity against, right? So let's get into some hacking ground rules. Rule number one is please do not do anything illegal. I mean, that should just be obvious, but it needs to be stated and it needs to be stressed, right? Approach cybersecurity in an ethical, careful way. What does this mean specifically? It means if you don't have explicit permission to hack a system, do not hack it. It's not hard. That's a pretty simple thing. Don't hack systems you don't have access to. In the same vein, don't attempt to find vulnerabilities in systems that you don't own or have permission to audit, right? So what does that mean in practice? I mean, how do you even become a hacker, get good, and so forth? Well, you can run a server for yourself to hack, right? If you're interested in finding vulnerabilities in devices, you use your own devices. You can stick to software and services that have bug bounties. Believe it or not, the current state of cybersecurity is that most companies, many companies, will actually permit you to try to hack them as long as you promise that they'll be the first to know. A lot of companies will actually give you money for that. I'll discuss some of these monetization opportunities in a different video, most likely. You can, of course, become an academic like me, my colleagues, researchers working, doing awesome work in my lab and other labs around the world. And academics get some leeway. We can do research that is very tricky to do as a non-academic. Research into, for as an example, the security of digital rights management. Laws such as the Digital Millennium Copyright Act have exceptions for research. Or if you really want to get a lot of awesome practice, you can become part of the competitive hacking community. Believe it or not, there are active competitions of computer hacking out there. I run one of the big ones, and I'll also discuss that in a different video to try to get you all moving into the competitive cybersecurity world if you're interested. All right, so what are the takeaways, right? Again, very important to stress, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. This is the attack defense asymmetry, right? In order to protect themselves, hacking team or any other group that has been recently compromised or hasn't yet been compromised has to block every attack. That's very hard because the attacker just has to land one, right? This is the typical attack defense asymmetry. Good defenses fail. Hacking teams, external network facing infrastructure was good. It seemed secure, but it didn't save them, right? And very importantly, hackers have to be careful around ethics, right? Our field is a very cutting edge development field with high impact in the modern world. We need to take that very seriously. And as you learn various ways to identify and attack security in computer systems, I'd encourage you to always keep this in mind and always stay ethical. That's all for this video. There'll be a number of introductory videos to the course, and of course a number of videos where we will learn about the different topics. I hope you stick with it. See you later.